Hi, and welcome to this demonstration of some of the advanced tools on the toolbar in your raster image editing program. So first we're going to go over to the toolbar and we are going to find the Blur and Sharpen tool. So over here it looks kind of like a teardrop. We've got our Blur tool, and Blur and Sharpen are kind of the opposite. These tools, they simply blur or sharpen the content of the layer under the stroke. You can change the strength of them at the top menu. So when I click on Blur tool, first I'm going to zoom in so you can see what I'm going to do. I'm going to find something really crisp. Let's see. Oops. Seem to have lost my mouse for a second. Okay. Click on that move tool. I'm going to press Control plus and I'm going to zoom way in on something that's in focus so that you can see what I'm about to do. Okay, so this middle part of the flower here, I'm going to click on my blur tool, and for the sake of demonstration I'm going to change my strength all the way up. This is going to make it super blurry. I'm going to change the size of my brush to really, really big, and not that big, somewhere where you can see it. And I'll change the edge of my brush to be a little bit soft so that it won't be so harsh. Okay, so now I'm going to click and I'm going to drag. And you can see as I click and drag, I make that crisp, the Christmas look. You can see the spikes on it down here. Let's make those go away with the blur tool. Let's just blur those right out. Look, so now they were in focus, now they are out of focus. So that was me demonstrating the brush at 100% strength. You might want to use a little less of a heavy hand when you want to blur something, but for the sake of demonstration, that's how it is. Okay, so I'm going to go over to my history palette over on the right hand side. The history, you can see everything I've done since I opened the picture. I opened it, I used the move tool, and then I used the blur tool twice. So I'm going to click back all the way back to open in my history. And so now it's just like it was when I first opened the image. I'm going to click H on my toolbar for the hand tool so that I can click and drag over on the canvas back to where I was. And now I'm going to demonstrate the Sharpen tool. So I'm going to go right under the blur tool. We've got the Sharpen tool. This is going to sharpen up and add more contrast between the pixels. So I'm going to demonstrate with a strength of 100 and a large sized brush, but I'll make the edge of the brush a little softer. All right, here we go. Let's see what happens when I draw this on. You can see it's really strong. You can see as I painted over it, it's immediately making more contrast between the pixels that I painted over. So it just sharpens that right up. Okay, let's click back in the history, or I could just press Control Z on my keyboard. That's going to undo, for example, if I just went up to Edit Undo, it's a step backwards. I could click Edit Undo, I could click Step Backwards, it's the same thing. If I want to move back multiple steps, I can go back in my history and do that. That's a good place to do that. Okay, so let's go to the Dodge and the Burn tool. It's right underneath the Blur Sharpen tool. Dodge makes colors lighter. So again, there's lots of options up here on the toolbar as to how to handle that. I'm going to just experiment with upping the exposure. I'm going to up the size of my brush, and then I'm going to make the edge of the brush a little softer. And let's see what happens when I paint the Dodge tool over this middle bit of the flower. You can see that the edges of my brush are soft and it's making everything lighter. I'm going to press Control minus on my keyboard to zoom out just a little bit. Hand tool to drag it up. I pressed H on my keyboard to get to there. Go back to the Dodge tool, which I can get to by pressing O. And I'm just going to experiment with making the inside of the flower a little brighter. You can see it was dark, just like that other side. Now I'm going to lighten that up. Let's see what that looks like when I zoom out. Interesting. Not sure I like it. I'm going to go all the way back in my history. I'm going to click back 5 steps to what it looked like when I opened it up. Okay, let's try the Burn tool. The Burn tool makes the colors darker. So let's make my brush bigger so that you can see what I'm working with. How's that? Yeah, that'll work. I'm going to up the exposure so that makes the brush stronger. I'm going to press Control plus on my keyboard. Let's make sure that works. Oh, it looks like it's working in the browser, but not in the program. Oh, it's because I have the brush thing selected. Okay, that should work now. All right, yeah, I had this, it was zooming in on my browser, but not zooming in Photopea because I had this exposure drop down selected here. So I'm going to click out of that. And now when I press Control plus, it zooms in on the canvas. I'm going to click the hand tool H to drag it over, and I'm going to go click on O, and it's going to take me back to my burn tool. And you've guessed it, it's going to make things darker. So as I drag it along, it's making things darker. And you can see it's looking really bad. It's very hard on the edge. Let me see if I can make the edge softer. It's very dark. Let me see if I can make that a little better. Let's just try making the inside of the flower a little bit darker. See, it's better. It's more subtle when you have a little bit less of a heavy hand with that. So I'm going to go back in my history all the way to what it looked like when I opened it. That's dodge and burn. Now let's look at our smudge tool. Smudge tool is located under the blur and sharpen tool. It's probably one of the most advanced of the tools. It's kind of like moving your finger in wet paint across the picture, if the picture was a painting. You can spread colors to other areas, make objects longer or shorter, move the border between objects. So let me just make it really strong just for the sake of demonstration. I'll make the size large and I'll make the brush edge soft. And let's scoot things over with our smudge tool. Let's see if I can make this, if I can smudge it out a little bit. Interesting. Smudge that, see if I can make the petal a little bigger by stretching that out. So it's like moving your finger in wet paint right across that image. Okay. Yep, looks like my screen has to catch up with me really quick there. All right, so let's undo everything we just did with the smudge tool by clicking back in the history. And lastly, I want to show you the sponge tool. The sponge tool is located under the dodge and burn tool. Sponge tool is going to either saturate the colors and make them more vivid or desaturate them and make them more gray. So if I choose saturate on my brush, I'm going to make my brush big, hardness less, and then as I paint with the sponge tool, oh, that's a lot. That's a lot. So you can see that really saturated it. Let's see if I can make the brush a lot less vivid by upping or decreasing the flow. So now when I paint it on, it adds saturation, but it's not as crazy as before. And that might actually be fun to play with on a picture like this where the flower is a little bit desaturated and you can add some saturation to that. Now, if something is overly saturated, you can use the sponge tool to desaturate and it's going to take color out. So as I paint it on the flower, you can see it's taking the red out. And if I kept painting it, it would turn it to black and white.